As we get going here in 1 Peter chapter 2, it became evident to me that Peter's using a lot of metaphors to describe spiritual things we can't see in the terms of earthly things that we can, so that we might understand them better. And that doesn't change at all here as we enter into verse 4. He's starting to use the word stone a lot. In this next section, he talks about that a lot. And I thought it might be good just to pause here a minute and maybe look at some of those metaphors he's using here over the next section, and how we might apply those to our life and understand what he's talking about better. The first thing that popped out to me is the word stone. You know, he's describing Jesus as the cornerstone, us as living stones, and that we're building this spiritual temple. And it occurred to me that, okay, here's Peter, the guy that Jesus had the conversation about, you're the rock, and on this rock I'll build my church, is now calling us stones. And I got this mental image of an actual big church or temple, right? It's built to worship God, to bring people closer to God. And Jesus is the cornerstone in that temple. If you visualize this with me, he's the cornerstone. And he had this conversation with Peter about being the rock. So you might say Peter was the very next rock on that pile. And now Peter's writing to everyone else and saying, hey, you're rocks too, because a stone is another word for rock. Pile on Jesus, this cornerstone, and let's build this temple. And in my mind became this image of just like this awesome big church, like you know the old churches of Europe you see on TV or whatever. You know, they're just so massive, reaching towards the sky, reaching towards God. And this image that, you know, back in the day, people would see that church steeple off in the distance and know, hey, this is a place where we can go and work on that relationship, getting closer to God, have a meeting with God. And you know, one of us piled on another as Christians can make that happen. And he brought this into this closure for me with this by describing us as his holy priests. If you take and think about that, a priest. What is a priest? I mean, when I say, hey, we're his holy priests, a lot of people, the first thing that comes to your mind is the person in the black outfit with the little white collar. And well, a priest, that's not me. Well, how is he saying? Am I supposed to go to seminary? Am I going to be a priest? That's not what he's saying. He's saying we all are priests in that. What does a priest do? If you go back to the Old Testament and look up priest and priesthood, what do we see? We see the tribe of Levi. And the tribe of Levi were the priests back in the Old Testament. And their job was what? They carried the ark, they carried the tents of meeting, all this stuff to create an environment for people to meet with God. And that's what a priest does. They create environments to meet with God. And Peter is saying, you, all of you, are called to create environments so that people can meet with God. And bringing that image back to the stones in that visual temple I kind of laid out, right, is that what's a church? A church is a place for people to come and meet with God. When we build a church, we're creating that environment. So I got to thinking about our hashtag, Be the Church, that we use all the time here in the ministry. Isn't that what we're talking about? Is be the church. Make an environment so that people might have a divine appointment with God. It's not necessarily about us cramming Christ down people's throat with a megaphone on a corner. It's about creating that relationship, that opportunity that provides the avenue for God to do his work through each of us as stones in that temple, so that people can meet God. They can get closer to God, whether they know him already or they don't know him at all. We're providing that environment to be the conduit between them and God. And that's what Peter's calling us to do here, as he calls us stones. And I just thought it was important to talk through these terms. We can get into the verses more in depth in coming weeks, but we have to realize what his heart is. His heart is Christ alone, cornerstone, and getting people to see that and share that experience. So my challenge this week is, what are we doing during this time of isolation to create that environment so that people we interact with might meet God? We'll catch you next week on Wednesday Wisdom.